The sun rose over the training field, painting the horizon in shades of gold and rust as the recruits stood in neat rows, their rifles resting against their shoulders. The air was filled with the sound of boots shuffling and the metallic click of gun bolts being checked. Sergeant Miller paced in front of them, his eyes sharp as blades scanning every face for weakness. He had a reputation for breaking recruits before they could build confidence. His voice carried authority and arrogance in equal measure. When he barked orders, the young men jumped to obey. None dared to meet his gaze except for one man at the end of the line. Frank Donovan, older than the rest. His hair silver but his posture straight. His eyes calm like still water in the middle of a storm. He wore his uniform like a second skin. No swagger, no pretense, only quiet purpose. The recruits whispered about him. The grandpa who had joined their training camp, rumors said he was a veteran of wars. They only read about the kind who had seen things beyond comprehension. Some thought he was there for nostalgia. Others believed he just wanted to prove he still had it. Miller saw him as a challenge, an unwanted mirror of a soldier. He might one day become bitter and outdated. Miller believed discipline came from fear. Frank believed it came from understanding, and so tension grew between them like a crack in ice waiting to break during the morning drill. Miller barked commands, firing posture, reload, precision aim the recruits. Followed clumsily, sweat dripping down their temples. One recruit's hands trembled so badly he dropped his magazine. Miller stormed over, grabbed the boy by the collar, and shouted in his face, "If you can't handle a rifle, you don't belong here." The boy's eyes widened, his breath shaky. Frank stepped forward without permission, saying quietly, "He's just nervous, sir. He'll learn." Miller turned his glare on him and snapped, "Did I ask for your advice, old man?" Frank met his stare and said, "No, sir, but you could use some patience." Miller's jaw tightened, his pride wounded. He motioned toward the targets. "Then fine, let's see that patience in action, old man. Show them how it's done." Frank stepped forward, taking his rifle and walking toward the firing line, his movements smooth, deliberate. He adjusted the strap, rested the butt of the weapon against his shoulder, and aimed. The recruits fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Miller folded his arms, smirking, waiting for failure. Frank exhaled and squeezed the trigger. 1, 2, 3 rounds, each hit the target cleanly near the center. The recruits murmured in disbelief. Miller's smirk faltered for a moment, but he forced it back quickly, saying, "Luck means nothing in a real fight." He raised his own rifle, ready to demonstrate what real shooting looked like. The recruits stepped back as Miller aimed with confidence, but as he pulled the trigger, a sharp metallic snap echoed. The rifle jammed, the bolt stuck, and when he forced it, a loud crack split through the air. The barrel had fractured. Miller cursed under his breath, slamming the weapon on the ground. The recruits froze, unsure whether to move or look away. Embarrassment spread across Miller's face like fire. He turned to Frank, eyes burning with irritation. "You see what happens when you rely on junk," he barked, as if blaming the weapon for his failure. Frank watched him quietly, then said with calm certainty, "Mind if I take a look?" Miller hesitated, but pride forced him to hand over the broken rifle. Frank inspected it, running his thumb along the damaged barrel, then reached for his own weapon, offering it to Miller. "Try mine, sir. Maybe it'll help." Miller scowled but took it. The recruits exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. Miller fired 3 quick shots, hitting close to the target center. He lowered the rifle, turning back toward Frank with a smug expression. "See, that's how it's done." But before he could finish speaking, the target stand collapsed, the paper fluttering down. Miller cursed again. The recruits bit their lips to hide their reactions. Frank looked at the rifle, then back at Miller with a faint smile. "May I?" he asked. Miller's pride twisted, but he nodded fine. "Let's see if you can do better." Frank lifted the rifle, his stance perfect, his breathing slow, every movement deliberate. He didn't aim at the nearest target, but one much farther away, a distance even Miller avoided, the recruits whispered as he steadied his aim, and fired 3 shots each, echoing sharply across the open field. Dust rose around the target stand, and when it cleared, 3 holes sat neatly in the center, splitting the paper cleanly down the line. Silence followed. No one moved. Miller's mouth opened, but no words came. Frank lowered the rifle, handed it back, and said softly, "Respect the weapon, and it will respect you." The recruits erupted in whispers, some barely containing their amazement. Miller stood rigid, his pride shattered. Yet deep down, he knew he had witnessed something real, something no training manual could teach. Frank stepped aside without another word, his expression calm, the same as before. The moment hung heavy in the air until Miller finally said quietly, "Dismissed," as the recruits filed out. They kept glancing at Frank like he was a legend. Come to life, the man who outshot their instructor with his own borrowed rifle. They spoke in low voices about the way he moved, the way he never flinched when he fired, the way his calm seemed steady, even the wind. Miller remained behind, staring at the broken weapon lying on the ground. He kicked at the dirt, his jaw clenched, then picked up the fractured rifle. His reflection warped in the metal. For the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his own arrogance. Meanwhile, Frank sat at the edge of the field, cleaning his rifle in silence. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. He could still feel the vibrations of the shots echoing through his arms, but there was no pride, only peace for him. It wasn't about showing up the sergeant or earning applause. It was about reminding these young men that control wasn't about power, but presence, that even a broken weapon could teach respect. If handled with care, the recruits would carry that memory for years, whispering the story of the veteran who borrowed a rifle and outshot them all long after the dust had settled on that forgotten field. That night, the camp was quiet, except for the hum of the wind moving through the trees. The recruits gathered in small groups, whispering about what they had seen that day, their voices filled with excitement and disbelief. Some laughed softly, still amazed. Others sat thoughtful, realizing they had witnessed something rare and humbling at the far corner of the mess hall. Frank sat alone, finishing his meal. Slowly, his hands steady, his face unreadable. He had always been a man of few words. His silence spoke more than any lecture could. The recruits glanced at him occasionally, as if afraid to disturb him. He looked at peace, detached from the noise of admiration around him. But deep inside, a flicker of memory stirred images of battlefields long gone, of soldiers he once trained, and lost, of lessons learned through hardship and patience. Sergeant Miller sat in his office, staring at the damaged rifle lying on the table. The crack along the barrel glinted faintly under the dim light. He couldn't shake the image of Frank's calm focus, or the sound of those perfect shots echoing across the field. He had spent his career believing that authority was built on fear, that soldiers learned best when broken down and rebuilt under pressure. But Frank's presence had turned that belief on its head. Miller ran his fingers over the broken metal and muttered to himself, "What does he know that I don't?" After a long pause, he stood and left his office. The night air was cool. The stars scattered across the sky like quiet witnesses. He walked toward the barracks and found Frank sitting on the steps, looking up at the stars, his rifle resting beside him. Miller hesitated for a moment before sitting down beside him. Frank turned slightly and gave a small nod. No words were needed for a while. They just sat there in silence. Then Miller said, "You made me look like a fool out there." Frank smiled faintly. "No, Sergeant, you made yourself look human." Miller frowned, confused by the calm tone. Frank continued, "A soldier isn't measured by how loud he shouts or how fast he pulls the trigger, but by how steady he stays when everything around him is chaos." Miller stared ahead, his pride softening in the quiet. Frank said again, "It's not the rifle that failed you, it's the anger that controls your hands." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that settles when truth has been spoken. Miller finally nodded. I suppose I had that coming. Frank smiled gently. We all do, at some point. The next morning during drills, Miller was different. His voice still carried authority, but the edge of arrogance was gone. He began watching instead of shouting, and when mistakes happened, he corrected with patience rather than rage. The recruits noticed the change and responded to it. Training felt different, calmer, more focused. Frank continued to assist quietly, guiding the younger ones, showing them how to breathe with their shots, how to listen to the rhythm of their heartbeat, how to trust their instincts rather than their fear. Under his guidance, the recruits began to shoot with precision and confidence. Their scores improved dramatically, and for the first time in years, Miller felt pride not in himself, but in his team weeks. Passed, and the camp grew tighter, more united during one qualification test. A young recruit's rifle jammed, his eyes widened, panic threatening to take over. Miller took a step forward, ready to bark orders, but stopped as Frank approached the boy. Slowly, his movements calm like water. He took the rifle, cleared the jam in seconds, and handed it back, saying quietly, "Don't fight the weapon. Work with it. Trust your hands." The recruit nodded, breathed deeply, and hit every target afterward. The entire line erupted in quiet.